My whole mission that was imparted from this, from my family, is people are happier and have more mission in life if they feel like they own something and they are impacting something for the positive.
Today's guest is Daniel Sachs, co-founder of AppDirect.
My view is that if in the last couple versions of software, you had to work for your software, in the future, your software works for you.
A cloud commerce unicorn, and now founder of Landbase, backed by 8VC, as he builds his next billion-dollar venture. A master of scaling teams and go-to-market execution, Daniel shares his deep insights on AI agents, leadership philosophy, and what it takes to build generational companies. Okie dokie, let's dive in. It's a real pleasure to have you on, Dan.
Hey, Shane, awesome to be here.
Yeah, so let's just dig into the personal side and how that, of course, affected your lens on entrepreneurship. What was your childhood like?
I grew up in Niagara, Ontario, Canada, in a family business. And my great great grandparents had started a furniture store in Niagara Falls on Main Street called Sachs Furniture. And it was literally my family's identity. You know, my great grandparents, my grandparents, my whole family grew up in the store, worked in the store. With me and my cousins, like we used to play on the mattresses and get in trouble for wearing our shoes, jumping around. When I was 6 years old, I sold my first furniture piece, which was a curio cabinet, to a 80-year-old woman, and stayed in touch with her. I did everything from ride on the truck, the delivery truck, to marketing to sales. And that really shaped my identity. My other grandfather as well on my mom's side was entrepreneurial. So I grew up with this really deep passion for small business. And that always gave me. I took a liking to business from like the first memories my parents would have of me, and had always been very convicted that I would start a business, run companies. I would have never known at that age that it would be in the technology sphere, but always knew that I was passionate about business and entrepreneurship.
Okay. And do you feel like you have to continue that legacy or compete in some regard or?
No, I think there's just pure humility about it, and I think it's more I'm grateful for that upbringing, and the reality of my family's business is it was a lot of grit, very different than it was today. Like my great grandparents immigrated here from Eastern Europe. They had nothing, like literally nothing, and I think the story was that they would take used mattresses and bedding, and they would refurbish it and then sell it. This was in like 1908 or something like that. So it was like a real like hardcore grit story. And they built, and over time, my family diversified into real estate and hospitality and other things. But essentially, the furniture store, which was the lifeblood of my family's identity, especially in Niagara, operated for 100 years. But in 2009, in 2009, just as I was graduating from university, the furniture store went under, and it was the height of the Great Recession. Businesses all around the world were struggling, and it's funny because my family's friends were the other proprietors on that street, on Main Street. There was Mueller, he was doing packaged goods, and then there was guys who did the shop, and Cupolos, which was the sports store, and just think of all these merchants that were on the street that were all my family's friends, all at the same time going under. And it sucked because like the thing I took away from the family business experience had nothing to do with legacy or nothing to do with let's say competing, as much as just this pride that you get from work. If you're an entrepreneur, you live a certain life where you feel meaningful, you employ people, you sell things, you are productive within your community. It's funny, even today, like people will talk a lot about my accolades, but I actually don't feel that powerful or important. But when I saw my grandfather walking around town, everyone knew he was the guy that you'd go to for furniture. And people had a 30-year relationship with him, or a 50, 70-year relationship with my family. And that brought an identity and pride into our daily lives that you could tell. And that that's something I really believe in. And I my whole career has been in B2B, particularly enabling entrepreneurs to have access to the capital, tools, and technology they need to be successful. And I think it was really just driven by a fundamental belief over many years, recognizing that people have more mission and pride in life if they have if they can correlate productivity in their business life and impact. And whether that's on a local level or on an international level, it doesn't matter. What I really want to see is, people at work being passionate about what they do. And I even think that, you know, typically we're talking about entrepreneurs here, someone who owns their business, but I actually think that you can create a culture in which, people at an organization can feel like entrepreneurs because they might have the ownership and equity and they may have the autonomy to make decisions. So I don't necessarily define entrepreneurship as like an S corp solo entrepreneur. It could be, anyone. But my whole mission that was imparted from this from my family is, you know, people are happier and have more mission in life if they feel like they own something and they are impacting something for the positive, and that's what I'm all about.
Yeah, and you mentioned so you started AppDirect during the recession as well.
Yeah, so graduated in right around this time of the recession. At the same time, was trying to actually get jobs on Wall Street. So at the prevailing time, I had advice and mentorship for some like amazingly successful people that I'd met and kind of alumni of my school, friends, parents. And the prevailing kind of thought was you go into investment banking or consulting and you get trained and you use that to raise capital to eventually start a business. So around '09, yeah, I was interviewing across like all the banks and had interviews at Goldman Sachs, all the top banks. I actually interviewed at Goldman Sachs on their headquarters at the time, which was 85 Broad Street in Wall Street, or just around Wall Street. And it was on September, I think it was like September 7th or 8th, which was a Friday. And it was the Friday right before Lehman went under and Bank of America bought everything. So just kind of give you a sign at the time. So like on one side, it was like, holy shit, the world was blowing up. My family's business went under, couldn't, like the kind of availability to get a job was crazy. But flew to San Francisco to meet my friend, got a free ticket to the Web 2.0 conference, and credit because I just talked to this guy after 10 years. The guy's name's Daniel Robinson, but it was a guy that I went to camp with like when I was, 8 years old or whatever. And he was in San Francisco at the time, saw him. He's like, I have this extra ticket, gave it to me. And I remember going to this conference at the Moscone Center, and it was like even before SaaS was a word, the idea was this like, themes of crowdsourcing and Web 2.0, kind of similar to maybe what's happened over the last few years with like AI and Web 3. And nothing had formed yet, but there were all these ideas. And I remember seeing this company present. It was these two founders. It was called Threadless, but it was the idea of crowdsourcing a t-shirt. And at the time, I was like, what if you could crowdsource a business idea? And that could maybe be a way that, entrepreneurs could kind of come up with ideas and start things. And that was like my initial premise. And I went to my this was pre, but who ended up being my co-founder at AppDirect, pitched the idea. His name's Nicholas Desmarais. He was at Bain and Company at the time. And he was like, "Dan, that's a shit idea." So like I was like, put my head down, went back to the East Coast, and thought like, I've got to find a job or figure something out. And then he called me back like 2 days later. He's like, "Come live in my apartment and let's brainstorm this thing. Your crowdsourcing thing. I'm not sure about it, but have you heard of this thing called SaaS?" And
Huh.
we kind of like researched very like analyst consulting like the SaaS industry, and really kind of built up this vision for saying like SaaS is going to be the predominant way businesses access technology, which by the way at the time it was not the prevailing notion. Everyone thought that SaaS would fail, and the first thing I did was create a list of the top 100 SaaS companies that I thought were cool, and on that list, like I looked at it like recently, it was like Shopify, Crowdflare,
Oh,
Dropbox, Box, Mailchimp, HubSpot. But like this list was like trillions in market cap today. It's insane. And these were like people who were just like individuals in their house. Maybe they had small teams. I remember going to the Dropbox million user party. So that was like probably the most mature out of the cohort. But in general, like literally this group was so small. And the founding premise for AppDirect was that there's all these cloud technologies that could save these businesses, but businesses around the world have no idea where they are, who they trust. So the idea is, what if we created a marketplace that essentially took these Silicon Valley upstart companies and brought them around the world? And in order to do that, you needed to create infrastructure at the commerce layer to be able to package and resell these apps. And then we also created partnerships with local trusted providers, which ended up being like local telecom, software resellers, people who had relationships with businesses, and essentially brought these SaaS tools to the world. And fast forward to today, we do above $3 billion of software resale annually. We service thousands of resellers and millions of end businesses that are accessing this technology. And it's just been amazing to see that ecosystem grow and thrive. But kind of fast forward to today and of late, I always felt that if I had the opportunity to be convicted in a new tech trend, I'd love to try my luck again at building and use the experiences and lessons that I had. So I was able to transition AppDirect's leadership to my co-founder Nicholas, and start something new. And in my view today is that the equivalent of SaaS in 2009 isn't generative AI; it's actually agentic AI, and I think that's going to change everything. And we've been building an agentic AI over the last couple of years. The terms really only come to discourse in the last few months. But yeah, happy to go deeper.
Yeah, would love to. You're exceptionally bright and plugged in. I mean, it sounds like you don't stop. Your mind is always geared toward business creation, as fueled by your personal background and maybe own woes initially out of school en route to Wall Street, or well, taking a step over to San Francisco instead. And if only you had invested in those nascent companies at that juncture. So, and do you, by the way,
Yeah.
do you invest? I get the impression you do.
Yeah, so essentially, at the time, I didn't have the capital to invest, nor did I think it made sense because at AppDirect, we were partnering with all the SaaS companies, so I didn't want to bias the ecosystem. Turns out I'd say that's a bit of a regret. I think I could have, put some capital to work or I mean, at the time, there weren't like the idea of little angel funds, but yeah, right now I am focused on investing particularly small checks in agentic AI businesses where I can kind of add value. And I do think it's a different world because back then, like literally, it was hard to find 100 companies, let alone anything. And those companies, those 100, I mean, 70 of them became really successful, and 50 of them became unicorns, and many of them became decacorns. And you have Shopify and other outliers that are like 100 billion plus. So I think like the reality today is that for every idea, there's probably dozens of like extremely well-funded companies. Then there's probably like 100 angel or seed companies, and then there's probably like thousands of bootstrap companies. So it's a lot harder to pick. So really different world, but
Well,
crazy
would
opportunity.
love to get into agentic AI. We were lucky enough to invest in Inception alongside HubSpot CTO Dharmesh Shah and Amit Vadusab, founder of Clearbit, and GP at Earl Grey Capital, who sourced the deal for us. So, Crew AI had their Series A led by Insight. It looks like they're on the verge of a preemptive Series B. Investors are clamoring at their door. But Jensen Huang at NVIDIA about a month back just announced the partnership with the company. So, but sounds like you're really in the know within agentic AI. So break it down.
Yeah, so I simply like to define agentic AI as AI that takes action based on data, and where a language model chats in natural language and has been trained on publicly available information. I think that there'll be a new set of models built for different functions and verticals that will have context not just on public information, but public and private information and your company's data that will be able to execute certain functions. So another term that people use is AI agents. I personally don't like that term because I think that there's some companies that are like, I'm your AI marketer, I'm your AI SDR, and I'm going to take over your job. I just personally don't think that that's the like it's undervaluing the potential. Another word for agentic AI or reference is multi-agent systems, which I think gets more accurate. So in my view, the biggest difference between on-prem and cloud software and then what's possible with agentic AI is that in the last two generations, you had to work for your software. So you literally put information into a database and you'd query it and get it back. And over the 20 years or 30 years, our interfaces got more addicting. So people in B2B wanted to create power users that spend all the time in the app. And the result of that is that in every role, you have people who like their whole job is to just do manual processes in an interface on that tool. And it kind of sucks. Like it's shitty sitting in front of a screen. You can feel your mind going numb. Just like you're not using your creative juices, you're not being human. So my view is that if in the last couple versions of software, you had to work for your software, in the future, your software works for you. And that means ultimately you can reclaim your day and do more of what you love. And that could either mean that you're spending more time doing, personal things like being with family or, going and hiking or whatever. Or it could mean reclaiming your day to put more into creative juices at work. And I think it's up to every company and every individual to choose. do I want to work more or do I want to have, have more, family time? But I do think the result of AI agents and agentic AI is definitely that, I'd say 80% of the way we do things, as of last year is going to go away in most roles. And the question is, what do you do with that 80% time back? I don't think it means that humans are not necessary or important. I think humans are more important than ever. But I think the skill sets that matter are going to go back to old school skill sets of like 20 years ago. So, lately you would hire someone because they have experience in, being an Excel modeler or like being a power user of Salesforce or something like that. I feel like moving forward, the reason why you're hiring someone is because they have insane relationship acumen, a really strong network, or they have creative juices that allow them to
Hmm,
channel in a different way. Um,
cool.
the way I would like simply think about the old world versus new in agentic AI is with agentic AI, your software is going to work for you. And instead of you having to prompt your AI, the AI will prompt you to say, here is, based on the data we see, here's an action that you can take. Do you want to take it or not? And it's as easy as saying yes, no, or edit. And that will move the pace of business far faster. So if today businesses and teams are marred by manual repetitive processes across fragmented software systems and siloed teams, we're going to move to a world where the machines can make sense of all that, automate it, and bring it to life. So all that's happening is your software is telling you, here's an action you can take. Here's the way I thought of it, the train of thought. Here's the proof of why I think this is a good decision. Do you want to take it or not? And then it really comes down to professionals at work to be decisive decision makers or to be creative guiders of this information. And that will dramatically accelerate the pace of business.
How does any of this relate to what you're doing now at Landbase?
Landbase is a tool that helps you intelligently automate your go-to-market, meaning we can help you generate leads and mature those leads down funnel. So what I found from speaking to or servicing millions of businesses and speaking to many business owners over the years is that the biggest pain point they have is generating leads that convert. So what Landbase is set to do is to transform that. Now, there's probably like 1,000 companies that I've heard of that are trying to do that have launched in the last year. Um, so why are we different or how are we different? We've trained the world's first and only agentic AI model to understand, predict, and execute go-to-market outcomes. So we really started our R&D, a year and a half ago, and our chief data scientist, Hua Gao, was a Stanford PhD in neural networks who had been working on natural language processing and machine learning, even before the LLMs came out. He was probably one of the only people to do it in go-to-market. So he co-founded Everstring, which was bought by ZoomInfo. It was a Sequoia and Lightspeed-backed company. So kind of one of the only people who had been working on these things. We've assembled a team of data scientists, machine learning experts, like purpose-built for go-to-market. So a lot of the value of our technology you can't see. Think of it as like an applied research lab, kind of like what OpenAI would have been years ago. But we're starting to integrate our models with our products and see really, really revolutionary impact. And the way to think about it is that if you were to prompt a language model, so let's say today, a lot of people use OpenAI for go-to-market. There's tools like Jasper for marketing or 11x for lead gen that are out there, and they're prompting a language model. But a language model, yes, has context on the publicly available info, but it doesn't have the context as to private data and personal data to be able to understand how to drive a better outcome. Whereas our models have been trained on how to predict and understand and score specifics of our use cases. So it's fundamentally a different way to build models. So if I, when I think about my angel investment in a space, because you talked about it, I bet that there's 1,000 companies in every category, or more. There could be like, I think actually, I would say that if 2023 and 24 were the year of more and more companies, I think next year is going to be like 25, 26 will be a consolidation because I don't think that it makes sense to have this many companies and there'll be moats. So if you have a lot of capital, you'll have a moat. If you have better brand, you'll have a moat. If you have a data science prowess, you'll have a moat. But my kind of the way I'm applying agentic AI is that I think in the when we started the company, the word agentic AI barely existed or no one used it. And then, I wrote a Forbes article that I called it AI native instead of agentic because it was uncertain what the term would be. but I think like no one was talking about this, or there weren't many people publicly. As of September, like everyone's talking about AI agents, and now everyone's talking about agentic AI. So I think what you have to do when this happens, Peter Thiel is one of my investors through Mithril at AppDirect. Talks about last mover advantage and also like use of keywords. So he's like everyone uses buzzwords and it means nothing. So I think what you have to break down is which there's probably only a few in every category. If there's 1,000 players in a category, you got to find the ones that really have the potential to build moats and kind of bet on them. And it may be the last mover, not the first mover. Um, and I saw this with SaaS. So, how I said in 2009, there were about 100 SaaS companies that I identified. The reality is there were about 30,000 ISVs, old school software companies at the time. They all said that they were cloud and they were SaaS as of 2010 and 11, even though they weren't. The term was actually ASP. So they would virtualize an on-premise application and call themselves cloud, but it was bullshit. And I think it's very similar to today, where people are saying like they're an AI agent company or agentic AI company, but if you look at it, all they're doing is prompting a language model. Another term of this like is like a GPT wrapper. It's like a derogatory term around companies that are building right now. Yeah, this is what I'm like living and breathing day in and out, is just thinking about, where are the moats, where's the differentiation, and how do you position as a differentiator, or a leader in your space.
Okay. And how do you do it? How do you be a last mover when you're an early startup yourself? You recently raised your seed round, no?
The markets are moving so fast that last mover doesn't mean you need to get there a decade later. Even back in the social networking era, right? The time from MySpace to Facebook wasn't that long, but if MySpace was the first, Facebook was the last. So I think, same with Yahoo to Google, or whatever other, search engine that you, Alta Vista.
I mean, relatively speaking, if funding isn't your moat, what is? Because there might be competitors with hundreds of millions or tens of millions.
Yeah, I think you need so a couple things. And I like to take everything to first principles, but I think the opportunity when a startup can disrupt a new market normally comes from a tectonic shift in technology that therefore changes business models, brand, UX. It changes a series of things to create a cohort of companies that can be big. So the disruption of on-prem to cloud in 2009 created that. And you had a big buildup because AWS probably came out in 2000, I don't know, six or seven. And then at the time, there were all these colo, like the new kind of lookalikes that weren't AWS, but like all these other things. So it was disruptive, but the companies that aced it knew, like they got lucky where they standardized on SAML or OpenID for authentication. They some of the DevOps infrastructure like was evolving. So if you were 2 years earlier, like if you started the company in 2006, you would have probably picked all the wrong DevOps tools or had to build yourself. So your cost structure was fucked and you couldn't win. So there's like this timing where you could be too early or you could be too late. And often it could be 2 years. In this case, it could be months. Um, Therefore, you need a lot of access to information. I think that, back then it had to be in person. You need to know VCs, you need to go to meetups. Now I think it's a little bit hybrid where you can find a lot through, different threads and online. But I think too, like speaking to people who are at the forefront of these things really helps. Um, I would say that today, the opportunity for agentic AI, in my view, is 5x the market for SaaS, because SaaS, you were essentially taking technology, which was on-prem, which is, let's say, software, and moving it to the cloud. And maybe there was some net new value you could capture. Like there wasn't an on-premise Shopify, there wasn't an on-premise, Toast. So maybe like that's marginally bigger. So the pie for technology got bigger. With agentic AI, you're literally going after headcount, which is trillions of industry. But you can also expand the pie because the value of what you're creating is dramatically boosting GDP. So I truly see the market opportunity here like insanely bigger than it was. At the same time, to your point on how do you compete, I think you have to compete on multiple axes. It's not just one thing. So there's competition for capital, but if you could be stupid and raise at a high valuation, and then you're kind of screwed because you haven't come into your valuation. So I think you have to be conservative about it, or methodical about it. There's a brand moat, which is first mover advantage typically, which is like a Jasper 11X, where they can benefit from just being the first one. There is a data moat. And in my view, the companies that win, if you look in any cycle, it's typically a talent moat and a data moat. So think of Google, like really fucking smart people, okay? And then advantage algorithmically, where by the time people figured out Google was better for search, no one else could compete because their algorithm is so good. DoorDash, right, with Tony, like he was fucking smart and he built this algorithm that understood how to get food there faster and better and warmer. And like only Uber could catch up because they had a shit ton of capital. But like these are algorithmic moats where by the time you launch, no one can compete with you. And that's what I like to look to. And it's hard because you have to mainly make a bet on the talent and the density of engineering talent. And then you also have to look at really early signs of algorithmic advantage. And normally those companies are going to lag the market. So you have to really know what to investigate and look for. And like transparently, I have a complex because I'm a business founder. I didn't have an engineering background, but I have such a bias toward engineering founders. Like I probably wouldn't invest in a business that doesn't have CEO that's an engineer. But at the same time, I feel like I can mitigate it because my whole philosophy is like, how do you over-index on your weak points? So I built like literally, I think the best fucking data science team in the Valley for go-to-market. But yeah.
Okay, let's get into distribution because it's on your minds. Again, whether at Landbase, companies you invest in, what you're seeing out there in the ecosystem altogether. And you recognize, just going back to was he a co-founder, this guy who built LLMs in a commercial capacity and had his company acquired by, was it
Yeah,
Zoom
this is
Info?
why. Yeah, so he's my chief data scientist and co-founder. Yeah.
Okay. So why do what either the learnings from your first time around as a co-founder that you've embedded into Landbase now, or the ones he's brought in, what's your edge as far as distribution, knowing what you know?
My co-founding team also includes Emily Zong. So she actually wrote the Harvard Business case study on AppDirect. So I got to know her like back in 2012. And then she ran some of eBay's first AI and ML initiatives, and then was on the early product team at Carta. So they became close to Decacorn. And then she went and co-founded Oyster, which was one of the fastest unicorns ever. So they're a competitor of Deal. So it's her, me, Wah, and others. Yeah, I would say like we all bring lessons from our, former companies that either became unicorns or big companies. And most of the lessons you bring are actually the failures, not the successes. Like I feel like in my 15-year career, it was like, you know, let's say whatever, you take 365 times 15 and 90% of those days were failure days. It's just like it's always a slog. I only found this person or book this weekend, but I'd heard of him, but the founder of Waze, I think his name is Uri Levine, wrote a book on crisis management called Fall in Love with the Problem, Not the Solution. And I think like it's so good to get out there. The only thing that I had seen before it was Ben Horowitz, The Hard Thing About Hard Things, but where you really take the reality of what founding a business is like. And it's like, it's crazy because I have some amazing talent on the team that weren't a part of these founding teams. And you realize outside the CEO, the board, and maybe like a few people in G&A, the like companies are designed to not leak the bad that goes on. But like you have fucking blow up shit every day. It's like, all these things that could existentially kill the business. And I think, yeah, what's cool about seasoned people is like, when we talk about, okay, how did Carta grow so faster? Why did, Oyster was one of the fastest growing unicorns. Yeah, that's great. But like, fuck, they could have taken Deal. Like, why did they, why aren't they as big as Deal? Like when you think about some of these things, or like for me at AppDirect, I feel like we underperform our market potential by like 100x. Like I think AppDirect should have been a $100 billion company. Still proud that it's a multi-billion-dollar company and thriving. And but I think like yeah, I spent a lot of time thinking like how do you fall into your market potential? And I think it's not obvious. One thing I'd say is I would bet on my youthful self equally to our seasoned team. So it's like the ideal is if you could inject youthful energy where you don't have knowledge on all the problems that are going to come, but you could pair that with a seasoned team. So one thing that like Parker Conrad from Rippling has talked about a lot is that he hired failed founders or founders that
Yeah.
building in spaces that were like whatever. And I feel like look, any successful entrepreneur is just even if you're like fucking Bill Gates or Mark Zuckerberg, you're probably just you failed more than anyone else. So like I don't see it as a bad thing to like have challenges, but one trend I'm seeing is like I built relationships with a ton of my competitors. So people who have emerged in our categories in the last year that were incredible teams that were maybe bootstrapped or maybe small funded. And what we're realizing is like, yeah, there probably will be category leaders that will win. So what we've done is taken a strategy of like finding those teams and acquiring them because they're so good. So we just
Ooh.
acquired a team that had been building competitively in our space, and they were like pretty much three guys, but like insane the youthful energy that they had and the output they would create. So like what we're finding is now that we've had, we'll soon announce a second. We've done a few of these where we're injecting this like youthful entrepreneurial energy with this seasoned entrepreneurial energy, and like it's insane, like the combo.
Hmm.
So I think like the what I'm hoping I'm getting across to you and your viewers is that um, in order to win today, you need to have multiple moats, multiple points of differentiation. It's not good enough to just be marginally better in one area. And therefore, building a team that's uniquely positioned to differentiate and win is going to be critical. To follow up, though, to your point on distribution, the advantage of
Hmm.
Landbase is that our whole business is around helping businesses with their core distribution motion, which is go to market. My last company, AppDirect, was helping people with their channel. So how do you resell your software? And there's an element to that that I bring to Landbase. But with Landbase, essentially what we can do is execute end-to-end lead gen campaigns. So we're like, let's say 10, 12 companies in one, where if you were to do this well, so let's take like a top performing unicorn like a Ramp or Brex or Rippling, they're going to have um, product marketing teams that are going to develop products and then they're going to enable their sales teams. And then they're going to have teams that are going to identify the target market. And then they're going to probably deploy omni-channel campaigns to them through ads, through blogs, through thought leadership, webinars. And then they're going to have a big team of SDRs that are going to go manage territories to kind of execute against those market maps. And they're going to probably need RevOps and other elements to bring it all together. So that's on the people side. They're going to probably need about dozen data sources. So this is firmographic data like a ZoomInfo, Apollo, or many of them. They're going to need intent data like Bambora. They're going to need website visitor identification like Art B2B. They're going to need like all these different signals in order to build a best-in-class data and intelligence kind of engine. Then they're going to need about a dozen things in the software stack. So everything from let's say uh, um, like instantly or like let's say instantly for email, Dripify for LinkedIn. They're going to need an auto dialer like Orem or Nix for calling. They're going to need Warmy for warming domains. They're going to need IT team to build up more things. They're going to need like Outreach or Salesloft for sequencing. I mean, you can get the ideas that there's all these manual repetitive tasks across siloed teams and fragmented
Hmm.
software stacks that create a ton of redundancy. And essentially, what was required is if you are building software for humans, it's a shit ton of interface you need. And then there's a ton of different integrations. But if you can build software for agents, which is this idea of agentic AI and multi-agent systems, you need a lot less. So essentially, we built all those things in one because we've trained our models to have a brain to think about all this workflow. So ultimately, what Landbase does and what we leverage for our own go-to-market is we can help you target who you should go after. So what's your total addressable market? What are the signals in order to know when to reach out to them best? What are the campaigns that you want to target them with? Is it LinkedIn and phone? Is it in person? Is it seeing them at a conference? Is it, building blogs and lead gen? And we can execute and generate content across all those campaigns. So essentially we can do everything end to end. And we do have human intervention where the humans can essentially approve or decline a campaign, or edit it or kind of come up with their own ideas. But the idea is that we've built models and software so we can execute that entire end-to-end workflow to prompt the user.
And going back to hiring briefly here, because we're coming up on time. When you say you hire these exited founders and folks who've seen companies grow, do you also, as you mentioned earlier, hire instead of, in lieu of experts, folks who can connect well or build relationships?
So great question. At AppDirect, we were very focused on what we call the values-based culture, and we defined five core values that were very integral to kind of our success, and we hired based on them, and performance managed based on them. And when we did that, we did an exercise of like the companies we admired, and what we found is like there's no right or wrong set of values, but surely having a set of values and rallying people around that is what drives success. So you could take companies back then, whether it be a Four Seasons or a Walmart or what were some of the other ones we looked at? Microsoft or whatever. Like very different ones had opposite values, but just by defining your values and how you hire, you can drive kind of interesting outcomes. So with Landbase, we took it a step further where we looked at the principles of like how you build. And Ray Dalio has a book called Principles that I thought was really interesting in this. But
Yep.
yeah,
Nice.
our approach here was to say, what are the principles of how we do things, and how can we align, teams on those measures, and how can we, identify and train and maintain and reward people amongst that area. So I think that's been our approach is to lead with principles first and kind of apply that to how we assess people.
Super useful. What about a resilience practice?
I think resilience is huge. That's something like it's a term that has like a lot of weight behind it. There's a lot of like literature you can read around resilience. Um, what I find today, so one thing that's different from my first time around is I do believe that you need to build a high performance culture, which means the faster you identify if someone's going to work or not, the better it is for the company and the individual. I used to always be afraid of like telling people that they're not performing or trying to, you know, the bad word firing. But I think what you realize is that if people are struggling, if you see someone struggling, they probably feel it and it's probably a bad weight on them. And either you calling it out and supporting them to succeed and turn it around, or to give them the option to go find a place where they'll be successful, I think is super important. We've had, if I look at some of my alumni from AppDirect, some that I even fired, they're insanely successful. So I think like there's nothing wrong with being exited. It just means you weren't right for that organization. So the things that I think about in this era is you're not always going to get hiring right. Often, I'd say 50% of the reason why you get it wrong is you're taking a bet on someone who's coming from a bigger company that hasn't been in a startup and has the experience in that domain, and they just can't handle the pressure or the resilience of like being in an entrepreneurial environment. So I think like that's 50% of why something would go wrong. The other 50% is the opposite, where you're taking someone who's been a startup person, but they don't have the structure or the domain expertise to be an
Mm.
expert. So I think the key is how do you build a team that has diversity of thought and experience that can come together to push each other. So the difference I'd say in my culture at AppDirect is I think AppDirect we always opted for positive mental attitude, humility. We didn't really ruffle feathers. Here, I'm kind of injecting, kind of like the Steve Jobs, like Lisa versus Apple II team. I've like created teams that are like intellectually sparring,
Mm.
um, still with mutual respect. But yeah, I think like my test here is how do we mixed seasons people, very technical expertise, but then also like, youthful energy. How do you find like we're operating, we still believe in in-person culture, but we wanted multiple markets. So we have a team in Silicon Valley, we have a team in Toronto, we have a team in Eastern Europe, Warsaw. Um, and that helps balance out costs, but also you have the cultural dynamic. So I think yeah, I think a lot about the early team building is figuring out how do you get the best people in the world at a specific domain, which often means that they're not going to have the experience at this phase of startup. Or how do you have people who have been like the best person who's done it 4 times getting, startup marketing from like seed to series B. So it's like you have to pick your mix. You're not, and then
Mhm.
the last thing I'd say is things are moving so fucking fast that you don't have the liberty to wait. So I think that um, you know, there was a phase for a while where we couldn't hire certain roles in certain markets, and we said like, okay, let's just hire in a different market because waiting 3 months could mean like, 3 months is like years in this world. Um, yeah, to just bring it back full circle. Like think about, you know, Yahoo to Google for first mover to last mover, or Facebook, MySpace to Facebook. Things are moving faster today, so it really means I may only have like 6 to 12 months to define the difference between, being still an okay company, but or being like the $100 billion behemoth. So I'm in it to win. It's really, really competitive today. And you need teams that are just all in.
Okay, on a closing note, right, in respect to your time, you're super on, and I think we have reason to believe Landbase is going to succeed in equal measure. What do you do to relax and have fun? Or have you created an environment that's harmonic with work and play together?
So this is interesting because I think this fell through the discourse, but back when I was starting at AppDirect, it was that like thing that you'd see in the movies, which was like you're eating ramen, working 24/7 in San Francisco in an apartment. You don't, do anything else. Like I gave up my favorite thing in the world was skiing, or, I loved music. I did nothing for years. I didn't even leave San Francisco other than for clients, like didn't see any friends, didn't speak to family. And what I realized is as the business scaled and matured, for me to be sharp as a leader, I needed to be on at work. And that meant I needed to be balanced. I define it as social health, and there's a lot of now frameworks, but back then there wasn't. But it was, for me, it was making sure my health was in check, physical health, mental health, um, my peak performance, which would be things like, my athletics and my nutrition, making sure that I had social health, which would be like my relationships, and then like hobbies outside of work. So it was interesting because I was at a Goldman Sachs conference. It was like the Business and Innovators Conference. This might have been 2014 kind of range. And Goldman Sachs, like hardcore, right? Known for like the most intense work hours, all this back in the day. But like Lloyd Blankfein was the CEO, but David Solomon, who's an SEO, was the kind of guy hosting. These were hardcore people, but the sessions were all about like meditation. They had Wim Hof and Laird Hamilton, and they had Ariana Huffington talking about the importance of meditation and mindfulness. So it's like a huge opener to me that like as a leader, if you want to succeed, you need to have balance. So essentially, I built all these tools and techniques around how I can develop myself as a person outside of work. And I layered all this on, and I feel like it was really important, really matured. And transparently, when I started Landbase, I took all of that to the forefront and kind of really focused on it. Meditation and mindfulness, all this stuff. To be perfectly blunt, I think if you're starting as a startup founder, you need to fucking throw it all away and just grind. Like right now, I have I have an injury right now, but I'm like literally in my bedroom, and other than seeing my kids for an hour that are coming in, I'm fucking hustling. And I think if Landbase isn't $100 billion company plus, I'm gonna blame it because I started the company for the first 6 months with the attitude of I can still travel a bit, I can still go to concerts, I can still ski, I can still be balanced. Um, I don't know if this is for everyone, but my view is you need the hustle early days, and if not, you're not going to make it to be $100 billion company. However, I need to have the self-awareness to know when do I turn the lights back and like fully tack because burnout is real. So
Mm.
uh, that's my personal view. I'm not proud of it
Cutting a
either.
fine line.
Yeah.
Say again?
I'm not proud of it either. Like I was so proud over the years of, hey, like I really believe in this work-life balance or work-life harmony, and I encourage my teams to take, time and things like that. Um, I struggle with it mentally because I think on one hand it's like it's really nice to kind of think empathetically about people and have like a balanced culture, but I just think the teams that are winning right now, they're in person, they're working like evenings, weekends, eating, sleeping. It's what it takes.
Cool, cool. Wow. I mean, our listeners have learned tons. I think this is our best episode to date, it's fair to say. And Daniel, an immense pleasure, an honor to have you on Punchcast. Thanks so much.
Thanks, man. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, wow.